My husband told his whole family my damaged body couldn't have kids when it was actually his infertility. So I read his medical records out loud at a family dinner. My husband Daniel and I had been trying for a baby for 2 years before we chose to see a fertility specialist. The test showed we both had problems that made conceiving harder, but not impossible. I had mild endometriosis, and Daniel had low sperm motility and count. The doctor said with treatment we had a strong chance, but it would take time, and both of us would need medication. Daniel acted supportive in the office, held my hand, said we were facing it together. But the second we got to the car, he said we couldn't tell anyone about his results, especially not his mother. He said it would crush her if she knew her son wasn't perfect. I agreed because I thought we were protecting his privacy as a couple. What I didn't know was that Daniel immediately called his mother Patricia and told her we'd gotten results, and that it was all my fault. He said my body was broken and couldn't carry children, but he was standing by me because that's what good husbands do. Patricia began treating me like I was defective. At every family dinner, she'd pat my hand and say how noble it was of Daniel to stay with a woman who couldn't give him children. She'd tell everyone at the table about her friend's son, who left his infertile wife, and now had 3 beautiful kids. She'd look at Daniel and say he was too loyal for his own good. She started bringing articles about adoption, surrogacy, and even divorce lawyers who specialized in childless marriages. She'd leave them on my plate at dinner like place settings. Daniel would just shrug and say his mom meant well. She made comments about my diet saying maybe if I ate better my body would work properly. She criticized my workouts, my sleep habits, my stress levels. Everything was my fault. When I took fertility medication that made me gain weight, she said I was letting myself go since I couldn't have children anyway. Daniel never corrected her. He'd even add details about my treatment to make it sound worse, saying I had to take dozens of pills, that doctors were shocked it was so severe, that they'd never seen such a difficult case. None of that was true, but it made him look like a hero for staying with me. Patricia started this thing where she'd bring other women to family dinners. Young, healthy-looking women she'd met at her gym or church who she'd introduce as friends, but then mention they wanted children someday. She'd seat them next to Daniel and spend the whole dinner talking about their good genes and healthy bodies. Daniel would play along, laughing at their jokes, exchanging numbers for networking purposes, he said. One woman even texted him asking if he was really happy in his marriage, and he didn't shut it down immediately. Said he needed time to think about his future. I noticed the text the moment they lit up on his iPad. What cut the deepest was that Patricia had launched a prayer group at her church for my damaged body. She had crowds of people praying over my so-called broken womb every Sunday. She would text me clips of those prayers where they said my name, begging God to repair whatever was wrong with me, so I would not steal Daniel's chance at being a dad. She even printed prayer cards with my picture that read "Pray for Lauren's fertility" and passed them out at church gatherings. Strangers I had never met stopped me at the grocery store to say they were praying for my condition. All that time, Daniel was meant to be taking medication to boost his sperm health, but he never took it. I found unopened boxes stashed in his car. When I called him out, he said it was pointless since I was the real issue. He claimed the doctor only mentioned his problems to spare my feelings, and that everyone knew it was actually all on me. He let me take hormones that made me miserable, while he did nothing because he decided I alone was the problem. After a year of this, Patricia arranged what she called a healing ceremony for my broken womb. She invited the whole extended family to place their hands on my stomach and pray. Daniel said it was a beautiful act. I refused to go. Patricia sobbed and said I did not want to be healed because I was punishing Daniel. That was the moment I reached my limit. I went to the filing cabinet and pulled out every medical record from our fertility specialist. All the test results, all the lab work, everything proving Daniel's issues were actually worse than mine. The doctor had even noted that male factor infertility was the main cause. I copied everything. At the next family dinner, Patricia launched into her usual talk about my defective body and how Daniel deserved better. I pulled out the records and began reading them aloud. I read the first page out loud. The numbers were there in plain black and white. Daniel's sperm count was 5 million per milliliter, when normal is 15 million or more. His motility was just 20%, when it should have been at least 40%. The doctor had written that these findings showed severe male factor infertility, needing immediate treatment. I lifted my eyes from the paper, and everyone at the table stared at me, like I just pulled a gun. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock as it sank in. Then all eyes turned to Daniel. His face went from normal to bright red in seconds. I saw pure panic in his eyes as he realized what was happening. He shoved his chair back, so hard it tipped over, and lunged across the table to snatch the papers from my hands. His brother Aaron grabbed his arm before he could reach me. Daniel was straining against Aaron's hold, trying to reach the medical files, while Aaron kept him restrained. Patricia's voice sliced through the disorder, insisting the documents had to be fake. She kept saying I must have fabricated them somehow, that there was no chance those were legitimate test results. Her tone grew louder and more forceful as she tried to persuade everyone at the table that I was lying. I stayed composed and pulled the second sheet from the folder. This page included more of the doctor's notes written in that sloppy handwriting doctors always seem to have. I read it out loud as well. The doctor stated that male factor infertility was the main issue in our case, and that Daniel's condition needed to be addressed before my mild endometriosis would even be relevant. Daniel's father, Robert, leaned across the table and took the papers straight from my hands. I let him take them. He adjusted his reading glasses and began reviewing each page carefully. His face grew darker and angrier with every line. I could see his jaw tighten as he realized his son had been lying to the entire family for more than a year. Robert looked at Daniel with an expression I had never seen before, like he was staring at a stranger instead of his own child. Patricia's voice grew even louder, demanding to know how I got private medical records. She accused me of breaking the law by sharing Daniel's personal health information with everyone. She kept repeating that I was violating his privacy and his rights. I looked directly at her and reminded her that she had been sharing my supposed medical issues with her entire church for a year. I told her she made prayer cards with my face on them and handed them out to strangers. I said if privacy mattered so much, maybe she should have thought about that before telling dozens of people at her church that my womb was broken. I asked her if privacy was only a family value when it protected Daniel and not when it protected me. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Daniel's sister Melissa had tears streaming down her face. She looked at Daniel and asked if everything he told them about my broken body was a lie. Her voice cracked as she said it. The waiter chose that exact moment to walk up to our table. He had a bright smile ready to ask if we needed anything. One glance at Melissa crying, Daniel being held back by Aaron, Patricia's stunned expression, and Robert reading medical records with a dark look was enough. The waiter's smile vanished, and he backed away from our table without a word. He nearly ran back to the kitchen. I would have left if the situation hadn't been so awful. Robert placed the papers on the table and told Patricia to be quiet for once. His voice was sharp and cold. Then he looked straight at Daniel and asked him directly if he had lied about the fertility results. Daniel was still breathing hard from trying to grab the papers from me. He mumbled something about the doctors just trying to make me feel better. He claimed his problems weren't the real issue, and that the doctors only said he had issues, so I wouldn't feel worse about my damaged body. Robert's face turned even colder. He told Daniel to quit lying and answer honestly. I took my own test results from the folder. They showed my endometriosis diagnosis and treatment plan. I handed them to Aaron since he was closest to me. Aaron read them slowly. He looked confused and said the results seemed pretty normal. He said this wasn't anything like what Daniel had described as being wrong with me. Aaron kept reading and pointed out that my doctor wrote the endometriosis was mild and very manageable with standard medication. He asked Daniel why he told everyone I had severe issues when the medical records showed something completely different. Patricia tried another angle. Her voice softened, and she said Daniel was probably trying to spare me embarrassment. She said he must have taken the blame privately with her because he loved me and didn't want me to feel ashamed. She framed Daniel like he was being noble by lying about me to his whole family. I laughed, and it sounded sharp and bitter. I asked her how telling everyone I was defective protected me from anything. I said Daniel let her organize prayer circles about my broken womb and invite other women to family dinners to replace me. I asked how any of that spared me embarrassment. Daniel finally snapped. He shouted that I had no right to do this to him. He said I was trying to humiliate him in front of his family and ruin his reputation. His voice rose with every word until he was nearly screaming. Robert cut him off mid-sentence. He said Daniel embarrassed himself by lying for over a year. He said Daniel allowed his mother to torment his wife based on lies, and that was Daniel's choice. Robert's voice was calm but packed with anger underneath. He told Daniel no one did this to him except himself. Melissa was still crying. She asked Daniel why he would do something so cruel. She said she couldn't understand how he let everyone believe such awful things about me when he knew the truth. Daniel's voice dropped. He muttered that his mother couldn't handle knowing her son wasn't perfect. He said he panicked after getting the results and blamed his mom because he knew she'd be disappointed if she knew the truth. Patricia's face drained of color. She looked like she'd been slapped. I watched her realize her own behavior pushed her son to lie and abuse his wife for over a year just to avoid her disappointment. I shoved my chair back and stood. My hands shook, but my voice stayed steady when I said I was leaving because I'd said everything I needed to say. Daniel rushed around the table and grabbed my wrist hard enough that I felt his nails dig into my skin. His face flushed and damp, and he kept insisting we could still fix things if we talked alone. He said his family didn't really get what was going on. His hand tightened as he tried dragging me back toward my seat. Aaron shot up and grabbed Daniel's arm, telling him to let me go immediately. Daniel yanked away from Aaron but still clung to my wrist until Aaron pried his fingers loose one by one. I pulled my arm back and rubbed the red marks Daniel had left on my skin. Patricia cried even louder, saying it was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved if everyone just calmed down. I grabbed my purse and the folder with my medical records and headed for the front door. Daniel followed, calling my name, but Aaron stepped in front of him and told him to give me space. Robert pushed back from the table and followed me outside. The cool night air hit my face, and I realized how hot and suffocating the dining room had been. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. Robert walked beside me across the driveway to where my car was parked on the street. He moved slowly, like he didn't want to scare me away. When we reached my car, he stopped and slid his hands into his pockets. He looked older than he had at the start of dinner, worn down and sad in a way I'd never seen. He said he owed me an apology for not questioning Daniel's story sooner. He said he knew Patricia could be harsh, but he hadn't realized how bad things really were. He thought she was just being her usual pushy self about grandkids, not actively cruel because of lies Daniel fed her. Robert said he should have talked to me directly about the fertility issues instead of taking Daniel at his word. He told me I deserved so much better than what his family had put me through this past year. His voice cracked slightly as he said he was ashamed of how his son treated me and how he allowed it to happen in his own home. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and unlocked my car. Robert stepped back to give me space to open the door. He said if I ever needed anything or wanted to talk, I could call him anytime. Then he walked back toward the house, shoulders slumped like he was carrying a heavy weight. I got into my car and locked the doors right away. My hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I could see Daniel standing in the doorway watching me, with Aaron still blocking him from coming outside. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb faster than I should have. The adrenaline made everything feel sharp, bright, and overwhelming. Part of me felt incredible, like I'd finally stood up for myself after a year of taking abuse. But another part of me was terrified about what came next. I just blown up my entire family in front of everyone. There was no one doing it or pretending it never happened. My phone started buzzing inside my purse before I even reached the end of the street. I took it out at a stoplight and watched messages stack up from unfamiliar numbers. Melissa had sent 3 texts asking if I was alright. Aaron sent one apologizing for missing what Daniel had been doing. Even Robert texted telling me to drive safe. I silenced my phone and shoved it back into my purse. I had to concentrate on making it home without wrecking because my hands were still trembling on the wheel. The ride home dragged on even though it was just 15 minutes. Every light felt endless, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror to be sure Daniel wasn't behind me. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I stayed in the car for a moment trying to breathe normally. From the outside, the house looked the same, exactly how it had when I left for dinner, but nothing felt the same anymore. I grabbed my purse and the folder with the medical records and went inside. I locked the front door and then went through the house checking every other door and window. I knew Daniel still had a key, but locking everything made me feel a bit safer. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood in the dark living room trying to process what I'd done. The furniture looked unfamiliar in the shadows, like I was seeing it all for the first time. This was the couch where Daniel and I used to watch movies on weekends. That was the coffee table where Patricia left those divorce lawyer articles for me to find. The whole house felt polluted by all the lies Daniel had told within these walls. I'd been living here believing we were a team dealing with fertility issues together. Instead, I'd been sharing a home with someone actively ruining my reputation to save his own ego. The silence was so heavy, I could hear the refrigerator buzzing in the kitchen. I sat on the couch in the dark and stared at the wall. My phone started ringing, and I jumped even though it was on silent and only vibrating in my purse. I pulled it out and saw Hannah's name on the screen. I answered and heard her asking if I was okay, saying Melissa had texted her about me. That's when I really broke down. Not the angry tears from dinner, but the kind that come from deep in your chest. I told Hannah everything. How I read Daniel's medical records out loud. How Patricia defended him. How Daniel grabbed me and Aaron had to pull him away. Hannah kept telling me she was proud of me and that I did the right thing. She asked if she should come over and stay, but I told her I needed tonight alone to think. I needed to sit in this house by myself and figure out what came next. Hannah had me swear I'd call her if I reconsidered or if Daniel showed up and made things feel unsafe. After we ended the call, I stayed sitting in the dark for a while longer. My phone kept lighting up with more messages, but I ignored them. I went upstairs and got ready for bed even though it was still pretty early. I locked the bedroom door from the inside and slid under the blankets with my clothes still on. Around midnight, I heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway. I stayed perfectly still, listening as he came through the front door. He moved around downstairs, and I followed him by the sound of his steps. Then he came upstairs and tried the bedroom door. When he realized it was locked, he knocked softly and said my name. He used that calm, reasonable tone, the one he always used to make me feel like I was being dramatic. He said we needed to talk about this like adults and work through what happened. I didn't respond. He knocked again and said he knew I was in there, and pretending he didn't exist wasn't going to fix anything. I stayed silent. After a few more minutes, he said fine. He'd give me space tonight, but we were going to deal with it in the morning. I heard him walk down the hallway to the guest room. The door shut, and the house went quiet again. I lay there in the dark, wondering how I'd ended up married to someone who could lie so completely, and then act like I was the problem for calling it out. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a second, I was disoriented, thinking maybe last night had just been a bad dream, but then it all came back and my stomach sank. I got out of bed and went downstairs. Daniel was in the kitchen, making breakfast, like it was a regular Sunday morning. He'd made my favorite coffee exactly how I liked it, and was cooking bacon and eggs. He smiled when he saw me, and said good morning like nothing had happened. He set a plate in front of me, and sat down across the table. He started talking about how his family had overreacted last night and that once everyone cooled off, we could all move on together. He said Patricia had called him late, really upset, and he'd calmed her down. He acted like the issue was everyone's reaction to the truth, not the truth itself. I stared at the breakfast he made and felt nauseous. This was exactly what he always did, acting like everything was fine and like I was difficult if I stayed upset. I told him I wasn't moving past anything until he explained why he lied to his entire family and let his mother treat me that way for a year. Daniel's expression shifted, and he got that look he always had when he was irritated with me. He said he didn't let Patricia do anything, that she just got carried away trying to help us have a baby. He said I was exaggerating by using words like abuse. He told me his mom had good intentions, even if she crossed lines. I questioned him about the prayer groups where strangers prayed over my damaged body, using lies he fed them. I asked about the women Patricia invited to family dinners to quietly take my place. Daniel brushed it off like I was nitpicking things that didn't matter. He said that was just his mom being herself, and I knew exactly how she was before I married him. Daniel leaned in and lowered his voice. He confessed that yes, he blamed me when the test results first came back. He said he freaked out because he couldn't stand the thought of disappointing her. Patricia had spent his whole life expecting perfection, and he couldn't face telling her he had fertility issues. He claimed he meant to tell her the truth someday, but the timing never felt right. The longer he waited, the harder it became to admit he'd lied. He framed it like an innocent slip that spiraled, not a conscious decision he repeated for a year. I asked why someday never showed up while I was swallowing meds that made me nauseous and heavier as his mother labeled me defective. Daniel stared at his plate and said he knew he should have spoken sooner, but didn't know how to undo it once it dragged on. I mentioned the medication boxes I found stashed in his car, the ones meant to boost his sperm quality. His jaw clenched, and he said the side effects were unbearable. He tried them for a few weeks and felt sick and exhausted nonstop. He added that my problems had to be handled first anyway, before his treatment would matter. The doctor said we both needed meds, but Daniel decided only mine counted. He let me flood my body with hormones while he hid his pills and told everyone I was the sole problem. I watched him across the table eating the breakfast he cooked and realized I was staring at a stranger. The man I thought I married never existed. I shoved my plate away and said I wanted marriage counseling, but only if he called his mother right now and told her the full truth. Daniel's expression changed, and he said we should deal with our issues privately before pulling his family in. I said again that he had to call Patricia immediately or counseling was pointless because our marriage was built on lies he told to save himself. He lifted his phone and set it down 3 times, each time inventing a new excuse for why now wasn't right. She'd be at church or too emotional to hear it by phone, or we should wait until next week's family dinner. I watched him dodge the truth, and finally understood he never planned to tell it, because protecting his image mattered more than anything else. I got up and told him I needed some time to clear my head, that I was going to crash at Hannah's place for a few days. Daniel's face flipped instantly, and he accused me of walking out on our marriage the second things got hard, saying a real wife would stay and work things out instead of taking off. I shot back that a real husband wouldn't have lied to everyone for a year and let his mom treat his wife like trash, but he kept talking over me, claiming I was overreacting and making everything worse by leaving. He trailed me into the bedroom as I grabbed a small suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. Daniel leaned in the doorway, rattling off all the ways I was failing as a wife by not giving him a chance to fix things, like he hadn't already blown hundreds of chances over the past year. I opened the closet to grab shoes and spotted a stack of papers on his side that I'd never seen before. I pulled them out and realized there were printed articles about adoption agencies, surrogacy prices, and international adoption rules. Every single one was covered in Daniel's handwriting. Notes in the margins about how these would be our only choices because of my fertility issues. One surrogacy article had a note that said, Lauren's eggs probably won't work, need to find egg donor. Another about adoption said, tell agency about Lauren's medical issues, circled 3 times. He'd been researching all of this and mapping out our future based on lies he knew weren't true, writing my so-called problems down like hard facts he had to plan around. I held the papers up and asked him what they were. Daniel glanced at them and said he was just looking into options for us to have kids since my treatment wasn't working. I pointed straight to his note about my eggs not working and asked how he could write that when he knew his sperm problems were worse than anything wrong with me. He brushed it off, saying he was just being realistic and that I was getting worked up over nothing. I stuffed the articles into my suitcase with my clothes because I wanted proof of how calculated his lies had been. Daniel lunged to grab them, saying that was his private research, and I laughed at him for using the word private after everything he'd done. I texted Hannah that I needed her to come get me, and she replied right away asking if I was okay. Daniel saw me on my phone and demanded to know if I was spreading lies about him to my friend, if I was trying to turn people against him like I had with his family. I didn't respond and kept packing, tossing in toiletries and my laptop without caring if anything matched or made sense. Hannah texted that she'd be there in 20 minutes, and I walked to the front door with my suitcase. Daniel followed me through the house, saying I was making a massive mistake, that leaving wouldn't fix anything, that I was blowing up our marriage over something we could fix if I would just calm down. I sat down on the floor by the door with my suitcase beside me and stared at my phone, so I wouldn't have to look at him. He kept talking at me, his voice growing louder and more frantic, but I gave no reaction to anything he said. When Hannah's car stopped outside, I took my suitcase and walked out without saying goodbye to Daniel. He followed me onto the front porch, still talking, insisting I couldn't just leave like this, that we needed to talk things through like adults. Hannah stepped out of her car and placed herself between me and Daniel, telling him I needed space, and he had to respect that. I put my suitcase in her back seat and slid into the passenger seat, locking the door right away. Daniel stood by the door, and Hannah drove off while he was still standing there. Once we turned the corner and I couldn't see the house anymore, I broke down crying. Hannah reached over and squeezed my hand, but didn't say anything, just let me cry while she drove to her apartment. After a few minutes, I wiped my face and told her about the articles I found with Daniel's notes about my supposed problems. Hannah's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and she said Melissa had been texting her all morning asking how to help, saying she was horrified by what Daniel did. I thought it was strange that Daniel's own sister was more on my side than he was, that she believed me immediately while he was still making excuses. At Hannah's apartment, she set me up in her spare bedroom and brought me tea while I unpacked my suitcase. I pulled out my phone and saw I had dozens of unread texts from the night before that I'd been too overwhelmed to check. I started reading through them and found messages from Aaron saying he couldn't believe his brother had lied like that and asking if I needed anything. Melissa had sent several texts saying she was so sorry for believing Daniel's version and that she should have asked me directly what was happening. Even Robert had texted saying he owed me an apology for not questioning things sooner. I scrolled through all the messages and noticed that Patricia and Daniel were the only family members who hadn't acknowledged what really happened. Everyone else was shocked and offering support, but the two people most responsible for the lies stayed silent. My phone rang and I saw it was Patricia calling. I almost sent it to voicemail, but curiosity made me answer. She started talking right away, without waiting for me to say hello, telling me we needed to discuss privately how to deal with the situation as a family. I cut her off and said I was done being managed by her family, that they'd been managing me for a year by lying about my body to everyone we knew. Patricia's voice shifted, and she said she wanted to apologize for being harsh with me, though she framed it as not knowing the full story instead of admitting she'd been cruel because of lies. I asked if she'd apologize to her prayer circle for making them pray over false information about my body, if she told all those people at church that she'd been wrong about me. There was a long silence, and then Patricia said she was trying to help and didn't know Daniel had been lying to her. Her tone turned guarded, and she floated the idea that the doctors could have gotten the results wrong, that labs sometimes mess up files and swap paperwork. I ended the call while she was still mid-sentence because I was finished laying out basic facts for people who refused to listen. That night, I was on Hannah's couch trying to calm down when someone began slamming on the apartment door. Hannah checked the peephole and looked back at me silently, forming that it was Daniel. He started shouting through the door that he had to talk to me, that this was absurd and I needed to come out so we could hash out. Hannah cracked the door just enough to say I wasn't ready to talk and that he needed to go. Daniel got louder and said I was turning his family against him and ruining his name over a misunderstanding. He kept repeating misunderstanding like the lies he told were accidental slips instead of choices he made again and again. Hannah warned him to leave, or she'd call the police, and after a few more minutes of him yelling through the door, I heard his steps fade down the hall. Hannah locked up and sat beside me, and that's when I noticed I was shaking. The following day, Melissa texted asking if I would meet her for coffee. I almost declined because I was drained, but she sounded truly shaken by everything, so I said yes. We met at a cafe near Hannah's place, and Melissa immediately apologized for trusting Daniel's side of the story. She said she had always felt her mom was too harsh with me, that some of Patricia's remarks came off mean, but Daniel kept saying it was just how his mother showed concern. Melissa told me Daniel had said months earlier that I was refusing fertility treatments because I was afraid of the side effects, which wasn't true at all. She kept apologizing and said she should have talked to me directly instead of believing Daniel every time. I told her it wasn't her fault that Daniel lied to everyone, but I appreciated her reaching out now. I stayed with Melissa in that coffee shop for another hour while she continued apologizing and filling me in on things I hadn't known. She said Daniel had called her back in March, months before the family dinner explosion, claiming I was being difficult about the fertility treatments. He told her I kept canceling appointments because I was scared of the medication side effects. That wasn't true because I took every pill the doctor gave me and showed up to every appointment on time. Melissa said she believed Daniel because he sounded so concerned about me, like he was trying to shield me from my own fears. She admitted she should have talked to me herself instead of blindly trusting everything he said. I told her Daniel lying wasn't her fault, but a part of me couldn't stop wondering how many other people he'd fed the same story to. Melissa unlocked her phone and showed me a message chain where Daniel had sent her articles about women who avoided fertility treatment because of anxiety. He had been constructing this entire fake narrative about me for months. Sitting there, it hit me that Daniel hadn't only lied about the test results. He'd been lying to everyone about everything, spinning a version of reality where I was the difficult one standing in the way of us having children. Melissa confirmed Daniel had given different relatives different explanations, always casting himself as the patient, long-suffering husband dealing with my issues. She said Aaron believed I was refusing IVF because I didn't want to gain weight. Patricia thought I was too career-focused to care about fertility treatments. Daniel tailored his lies to whatever would earn him the most sympathy from each person. I felt nauseous realizing how carefully he planned all of it. 3 days later, Robert called me while I was at work. He asked if I would meet with him and Aaron without Daniel or Patricia there, saying they wanted to know what actually happened. His voice sounded exhausted and sad in a way I'd never heard before. I agreed because they seemed like the only ones who wanted the truth instead of just shielding Daniel. We met at a diner the next Saturday afternoon. Robert and Aaron were already in a booth when I walked in, and both stood up when they saw me. Robert hugged me and apologized for everything, and Aaron looked uneasy, but genuine as he shook my hand. I sat across from them and took out a folder I had prepared. Inside was a timeline of Daniel's lies, starting the day we got the results and ending at the family dinner. I showed them photos of unopened medication boxes from Daniel's car, along with prescription dates proving he never took a single pill. I showed screenshots of texts from the woman Patricia had introduced him to, the one who asked if he was really happy in his marriage. Robert read everything slowly, his jaw tightening with every page. When he reached the texts, he looked crushed as he realized his son had been thinking about leaving me while playing the victim to everyone else. Aaron buried his face in his hands and said he needed to tell me something. He admitted he knew Daniel had been messaging that woman more than he should have. Daniel had shown Aaron some of her texts months earlier, joking about how interested she was in him. Aaron said Daniel told him it was only networking, that the woman was in his field and could have career contacts. Aaron didn't want to stir up family drama, so he kept it to himself. Robert looked at his older son and said he should have spoken up, that staying silent made him part of the issue. Aaron fully agreed and said he let me down by not saying anything when he knew something felt off. He apologized and admitted he talked himself into believing it wasn't his place to interfere in his brother's marriage. I told him I understood wanting to avoid family conflict, but yes, it would have helped to know I wasn't imagining things about those messages. Robert asked what I planned to do about the marriage. I told him honestly, I didn't know yet, but I couldn't stay with someone who trashed my reputation to protect his ego. I couldn't stay married to someone who let his mother treat me like garbage for a year, while he piled on more lies to make himself look good. Robert nodded slowly and said he understood, that he wouldn't expect me to stay after what Daniel had done. Then he surprised me by offering to pay for marriage counseling if I was willing to try that first. He said he knew Daniel had serious issues, but maybe a professional could help him see what he'd done wrong. I didn't agree to anything, but I took Robert's number and said I'd think about it. The following week I called a marriage counselor and set up an appointment to meet with her alone first. I wanted to explain everything before Daniel could go in and spin the story. The counselor's office was in a small building near downtown, and she had me fill out paperwork about the marriage and what brought me there. When we sat down in her office, I told her everything from the start. She listened without cutting me off and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she paused for a moment before speaking. She told me honestly that couples therapy isn't recommended when there's ongoing lying and emotional abuse like what I described. She said bringing Daniel in right now would only give him another space to manipulate me and control the narrative. She suggested individual therapy for me, first to work through the gaslighting I'd been through and figure out what I actually wanted. She gave me the names of 3 therapists who specialized in emotional abuse and manipulation. I left her office feeling relieved that someone with professional training had confirmed I wasn't overreacting. Daniel somehow found out I'd met with a counselor, probably by checking our insurance statements online. He called me at work and accused me of trying to build a case against him instead of actually fixing our marriage. He said real couples go to therapy together. That meeting with someone alone first proved I'd already given up. The way he talked about therapy, like it was about collecting evidence instead of actually healing, told me everything I needed to understand about how he viewed our marriage. I said I would talk to him later and ended the call before he could keep pushing back. That night Hannah came by my place with takeout, and I explained what the counselor had suggested. She opened her laptop and helped me look into the 3 therapists. We went through their sites and reviews, trying to find someone who felt like the right match. Hannah came across Dr. Mullen, who had excellent reviews and focused on helping people recover from manipulative relationships. I called and scheduled an appointment for the next Thursday. My first therapy session hit me harder than I expected. Dr. Mullen asked me to describe my marriage, and as I spoke, she would pause me now and then to point out things Daniel had done that weren't normal or healthy. She helped me recognize patterns I hadn't seen because I was inside them, like how Daniel would apologize for minor things to appear reasonable, but never apologize for the major things that actually mattered, or how he'd agree to change something and then act like that conversation never happened. She asked about moments before the fertility problems, when Daniel had lied or manipulated situations, and I realized there were dozens of examples I'd brushed off as misunderstandings or accidents. That session showed me how much of my reality Daniel had twisted over the years, not just around fertility. I left drained but also oddly lighter, like someone had finally given me permission to trust my own judgment again. 2 days after that first session, I woke up to a long email from Patricia sitting in my inbox. The subject line read, "A mother's plea," which should have been my first sign not to open it. She wrote that she'd been speaking with her pastor about everything, and they both believed marriage is sacred and that I needed to forgive Daniel. She included several Bible verses about forgiveness and the importance of keeping families together. She said Daniel had made mistakes but was truly sorry and wanted to fix things. The email ended with her claiming the real sin wasn't Daniel's lies, but me creating division in the family by refusing to move on. She said I was being selfish and prideful by holding on to anger instead of choosing Christian forgiveness. I read it twice, feeling more furious each time. Patricia had spent a year mistreating me over lies her son fed her. And now she wanted to lecture me about sin and forgiveness. She'd organized prayer circles about my supposedly broken body and brought other women to family dinners to replace me. Yet somehow I was the problem for not getting over it fast enough. I opened Patricia's email one last time and clicked reply. I wrote one short line asking whether her pastor knew she had set up prayer groups about my private medical details without my permission, then pressed send before I could talk myself out of it. The email showed delivered but nothing came back. Hours went by and my inbox stayed blank. I checked once more before sleep and still nothing. Patricia usually replied to everything instantly, often with long opinions and Bible verses. But this time she said nothing. That silence told me all I needed to know about whether she truly believed her actions were fine or was just hoping I would never call her out. 3 days later, I received a Facebook message from someone named Emery, who said he was Daniel's college friend. I didn't recognize the name, but I accepted out of curiosity about why he reached out. He wrote that he needed to share something that had been weighing on him for months. He said Daniel told him the truth about the fertility results when we first got them, admitted over drinks that his sperm count was the main issue, but said he couldn't tell his family. Emery wrote that he urged Daniel to be honest with everyone, but Daniel said it was too late to change the story, that his mother already believed it was my fault, and correcting her would only make him look worse. Emery apologized for not contacting me sooner, and said he felt awful watching Daniel lie to everyone while I carried the blame. I stared at that message for a long time trying to understand what it meant. Daniel hadn't panicked and slipped up like he kept claiming. He had intentionally told his friend the truth while continuing to lie to me and his entire family for months. He had talked through his lies, made deliberate choices to keep lying, even discussed how to maintain the false story. This wasn't bad judgment or shame spinning out of control. This was intentional deception where he knew exactly what he was doing and kept doing it because protecting his image mattered more than protecting me. I thanked Emery for telling me and closed the app because I couldn't look at it anymore. That night when Daniel came home from work, I told him I wanted to separate and that I was going to start looking for apartments. His face drained of color and he started crying, saying he would do anything to fix this and that he couldn't lose me. I watched him cry and felt nothing but exhaustion. I told him he could start by calling his mother right then, with me listening, and telling her the full truth about whose fertility issues were worse. He stopped crying and looked at me, then at his phone, then back at me. The pause lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it was enough. He asked if we could wait until tomorrow when his mother wasn't busy, said she would take it better if he called at the right time. I told him his mother was never busy at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and he knew it. He lifted his phone then set it down twice before finally saying he wasn't ready yet, that he needed time to figure out how to say it the right way. I went into our bedroom and started searching for apartments on my laptop, while Daniel paced the hallway begging me to please give him just one more day. I didn't respond and saved 3 listings that seemed doable on my income alone. Daniel eventually came in and sat beside me on the bed, took a long breath, and picked up his phone. He called his mother and put on speaker so I could hear. Patricia answered brightly, asking what was wrong since Daniel never called on weeknights. Daniel fumbled through saying he needed to fix something about the fertility results, that his issues were actually worse than mine, that he had lied because he was embarrassed. The line went completely silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then Patricia asked in a flat, odd voice if that meant the prayer circle had been praying for the wrong person this whole time. Daniel said yes and apologized. Patricia said she had to go and hung up without saying goodbye. Daniel set his phone down and looked at me like he expected praise for finally doing the bare minimum of telling the truth. He said that was really hard for him and asked if I felt better now. I stared at him, stunned that he actually thought he deserved credit for admitting he'd lied after getting caught. I told him I was still moving out and he instantly flipped from sad to angry, saying I'd never planned to forgive him anyway, and that this was just me punishing him. He said he did what I asked and it still wasn't enough, that nothing would ever be enough for me. I shut my laptop and told him I was staying at Hannah's again because I couldn't be in the same room with him right now. The next morning Melissa texted asking if I wanted help apartment hunting, and I said yes. We met for coffee first, and she told me Aaron was furious with Daniel over how he was handling everything. She said the family was splitting into camps. Some people thought I should forgive Daniel for the sake of the marriage because everyone messes up, but others thought Daniel needed real consequences, or he'd never actually change. Melissa said she was in the consequences camp, and so was Aaron. We spent the afternoon driving around to places I'd found online. Most were bleak or way too expensive, but the last one was a small 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an older building with hardwood floors and large windows. The landlord met us there and walked me through it. It was small but tidy, and the rent fit what I could afford on my own paycheck, without dipping into any shared funds. I completed the application right there, and the landlord phoned my workplace to confirm my employment. He gave the okay immediately, and I wrote a check covering the deposit and the first month's rent. Putting my name on the lease felt scary and freeing all at once, like I was finally reclaiming my life instead of letting Daniel run it for me. Melissa hugged me in the lot and told me she was proud. I teared up a bit, but they were good tears. Relief tears. The kind you get when you stop resisting what you know is right. When I returned to Hannah's place, I texted Daniel that I'd found an apartment and signed the lease. My phone rang right away, but I ignored it. He called 4 more times, and I finally answered. He was shouting before I could say hello, claiming I couldn't sign a lease without talking to him first, that he could challenge it somehow, that I was walking away from our vows. I let him burn himself out, then reminded him he walked away from our marriage when he lied to everyone we knew and allowed his mother to mistreat me for a year. He said that wasn't the same and accused me of being dramatic. I ended the call and powered my phone off. My therapy session was the next day, and I told my therapist everything about the apartment and Daniel's reaction. She pulled out a book and showed me a section on narcissistic personality patterns. She said Daniel's actions match several traits, especially the need to appear flawless and the readiness to sacrifice anyone, even a spouse, to protect that image. She explained that people like that can't tolerate being wrong or imperfect because their identity depends on admiration. She said Daniel likely wasn't going to turn into the man I believed I married, because that man never really existed. It was just a role Daniel played when it benefited him. Hearing that made something click in my head. I could stop waiting for him to change because he didn't believe anything about himself needed changing. In his mind, the issue would always be other people's reactions, never his behavior. I chose a Tuesday morning when Daniel had back-to-back meetings that would keep him gone until at least 3. Hannah arrived at 9 with her SUV, and Melissa showed up 10 minutes later in Aaron's truck. We didn't stop to talk about what we were doing or why. We just started loading boxes. I had packed most of my clothes and personal things the night before, moving quietly in the guest room while Daniel watched TV in the living room, acting like everything was fine. Melissa cleared out the boxes from my closet, while Hannah helped me pack up the few pieces of furniture that were truly mine, items I had brought into the marriage or paid for myself before we merged our money. The kitchen was tougher because I had to sort what felt like mine versus what felt shared, and I ended up leaving most of it since cooking together had been one of Daniel's favorite ways to pretend we were a happy couple in front of his family. I took my grandmother's mixing bowls and a cast iron skillet my dad gave me, and left the rest behind. The living room was the hardest because we had decorated it together during our first year of marriage when I still thought we were building something real. Every piece held a memory of choosing it together, talking colors, picturing the life we thought we would have there. I walked away from all of it. Melissa found me standing at the bookshelf trying to figure out which books were mine and which were Daniel's, and she started pulling down anything that looked worn or highlighted. She said those were obviously mine because Daniel never actually read his books. He just displayed them to look smart. We loaded box after box into the cars and the house started looking emptier, like the life Daniel had built was fading piece by piece. I left the wedding photos, the vacation pictures Patricia had framed, the decorative things his mother kept buying to make the house look more proper. By noon the SUV and truck were full and the house fell hollow. I walked through every room one last time and felt nothing but relief that I was leaving. I locked the door and placed my key in an envelope with a note saying I would come back for anything I forgot once we set a schedule. Hannah drove me to my new apartment, and we spent the afternoon unloading boxes and arranging furniture. The apartment was tiny compared to the house, but it felt more like home than anywhere I had lived with Daniel. Melissa ordered pizza, and we ate sitting on my new couch, the only piece of furniture I had bought just for myself. She told me Aaron was proud of me for leaving, and that he had wanted to confront Daniel about his behavior for months, but did not know how without hurting me more. Around 5, my phone started buzzing with texts from Daniel asking where I was, and why I was not responding. I ignored them and kept unpacking with Hannah and Melissa. At 6, Daniel called and I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times before I finally answered just to stop the non-stop buzzing. He was yelling before I even said hello, demanding to know where I was and why half the house was empty. I told him I had moved out and taken only what was mine like I had said I would. He shouted that I could not just leave without more discussion, that we needed to talk like adults, that I was being crazy and dramatic. I reminded him we had talked it over plenty during the past 2 weeks, and I was done being married to someone who cared more about his image than his wife. He broke down sobbing, claiming I was leaving him when he needed me most, saying his entire family was turning on him because of what I had done. I told him his family was turning on him because of what he did, not me, then ended the call. Hannah wrapped her arms around me and said she was staying over because she didn't trust Daniel not to show up at my place. The next morning, while I was making coffee in my new kitchen, Robert called. He asked how I was adjusting and whether I needed anything, then mentioned that Patricia had been crying to anyone who would listen about how I ruined her family. I could hear the irritation in his voice as he explained how she kept calling relatives and church friends, presenting herself as the victim of my supposed cruelty. Robert said he'd finally reached his limit and told her directly that Daniel destroyed his own marriage, and she helped by being cruel to me based on lies she never bothered to question. He said Patricia tried to argue that she was only being a concerned mother, but he shut that down by asking why she never once thought to confirm Daniel's story with me herself. Robert apologized again for not stepping in sooner and said he should have noticed the warning signs and how Patricia treated me. I thanked him for finally standing up to her and told him it meant a lot that he was willing to face the truth, even though Daniel was his son. He said being his son didn't excuse Daniel's behavior and that he hoped I'd still consider him family, even after the divorce was final. That conversation gave me the push I needed to make my next call. Jerome Tyler's office was in a downtown building with glass walls and modern furniture that made everything feel official. He was younger than I expected, maybe around 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm way of talking that made me feel less overwhelmed. I showed him the medical records, the text from Daniel to the woman Patricia introduced him to, screenshots of Patricia's prayer circle videos, and my own notes documenting every cruel comment and lie over the past year. Jerome went through everything carefully and said I had solid grounds for divorce based on emotional abuse and fraud. He explained that Daniel's lies about fertility caused both financial damage from unnecessary treatments I went through and emotional damage from the abuse that followed those lies. He said most divorce cases don't come with this level of documentation and that Daniel's pattern of deception wouldn't look good to a judge if we ended up in court. Jerome asked if I thought Daniel would fight the divorce, and I said probably, because he couldn't stand losing control of the story. He nodded like he expected that answer, and said we should get ready for Daniel to make things difficult, but that the evidence was overwhelmingly on my side. I completed the documents to keep him on as my lawyer, and he said he would prepare the divorce filings and have them delivered to Daniel within a week. Leaving his office, I felt like I had finally made a real move instead of constantly reacting to Daniel's decisions. Daniel was served the divorce papers at work on a Thursday afternoon. I know because he showed up at my apartment 20 minutes after the process server walked out of his office. He slammed on my door so violently my neighbor stepped out to see what was going on. I told Daniel through the door that I wasn't opening it and that he needed to leave. He started pleading, saying he'd messed up, but he'd do therapy and fix everything if I just gave him one more chance. His voice cracked, and he cried that he couldn't lose me, that he'd do anything to make things right. I stood on the other side of the door, listening to promises I'd already heard, and felt nothing but exhausted. I told him I wasn't interested in watching him act change just to dodge consequences. He got mad then, and started shouting that I was being spiteful, that I wanted to punish him instead of save our marriage. I said our marriage couldn't be saved because it was never real in the first place. It was just a set where he played the devoted husband while treating me like trash. He kicked my door hard enough to shake the frame, and my neighbor warned she'd call the police. Daniel finally left, but I could hear him crying in the hallway as he walked away. Patricia called 2 days later and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying before she even said hello, telling me she was sorry for how she treated me, and that she should have questioned Daniel's story from the start. She admitted she'd been awful to me, and said she'd been praying for forgiveness for her cruelty. I listened without speaking while she listed all the ways she'd been wrong, and it sounded sincere for the first time since all this began. Then she asked if there was any way I could forgive Daniel and give him another chance, saying he was shattered and barely functioning. I told her that wasn't my responsibility anymore. She cried harder and said she understood but couldn't accept it. She said she believed Daniel had learned his lesson and would never lie again. I said people don't learn lessons without consequences, and Daniel had spent his whole life avoiding them. Patricia was silent for a long moment, and then asked what she could do to help fix this. I told her she could start by admitting to her prayer circle that she'd been praying over false information and apologizing to everyone she told about my supposed fertility problems. She promised she would, and I hung up not fully believing her, but hoping maybe she'd actually follow through. Daniel tried everything to drag out the divorce process. He challenged the asset split, claimed I'd hidden money, demanded spousal support even though we earned about the same. Jerome cautioned him via his attorney that if the case went to trial, every lie and manipulation Daniel pulled would be sealed into public court records that anyone could look up. He made it clear that Daniel's medical files, proof of his dishonesty, and statements from relatives describing his conduct would all be submitted as evidence. Daniel's attorney was obviously unhappy because she kept pressuring Daniel to settle instead. After 3 months of constant back and forth, Jerome sent Daniel's lawyer a thorough breakdown of exactly what would be shown in court, including witness lists naming Melissa, Aaron, and Robert prepared to testify about Daniel's lies. Daniel eventually accepted a fair settlement to dodge that humiliation. His lawyer called Jerome, and they finalized the terms over the phone, while I sat in Jerome's office feeling unreal that my marriage was ending through legal negotiations. The divorce mediation took place in a bland conference room with beige walls and stiff chairs. Daniel arrived looking worn down and wouldn't meet my eyes. His lawyer was a woman in her 50s who kept shooting Daniel annoyed looks whenever he tried to argue over something small. We reviewed the asset split item by item, and Daniel attempted to claim things that were clearly mine, like my grandmother's jewelry and the car I owned before we married. His lawyer would quietly tell him to drop it, and he'd pout but give in. We agreed to a clean division with no alimony since we'd only been married 3 years and earned similar incomes. Daniel signed the paperwork with trembling hands, and his lawyer looked relieved it was finally done. The mediator said the divorce would be final once a judge reviewed and approved everything, which would take about 30 days. I left that conference room and drove straight to Hannah's apartment where she had wine and takeout waiting. A week later, Melissa texted me saying Daniel had started telling people I left him because I didn't actually want kids. He was spinning a whole new fake story where I'd been the one lying about wanting children, and he was devastated that I'd wasted years of his life. She said several relatives had heard this version, and some were buying it. My stomach dropped because of course Daniel couldn't just take responsibility. He had to invent another lie to protect himself. Robert learned about Daniel's new story and called a family meeting without Daniel or Patricia there. Melissa later told me Robert laid out the full truth to the extended family, showing copies of the medical records and explaining exactly what Daniel had done. Several relatives reached out afterward to apologize for believing Daniel's lies, both the old ones and the new ones. One of Daniel's aunts emailed me a long message saying she'd always felt something was off about how Patricia treated me, but she trusted Daniel's version of events. She told me she felt awful for not questioning things earlier and said she hoped I could forgive her for playing a role in it all. For months after that family dinner, where I read the medical records out loud, my divorce was finalized. Jerome called to let me know the judge had signed everything and it was officially done. I ended the call and sat alone in my apartment feeling more relief than grief. I wasn't mourning the marriage that actually existed, the one where my husband lied to everyone and allowed his mother to torment me. I was mourning the marriage I believed I had, the partnership I thought we were building before I realized it was all an act. That version of my marriage was never real, but I loved it anyway, and releasing that illusion hurt, even though I knew it was necessary. Hannah came over that night with champagne, and we toasted to fresh starts. Melissa dropped by with Aaron, and we crowded into my tiny living room talking about anything except Daniel. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for the next lie about me, or the next cruelty headed my way. I kept going to therapy every week, and my therapist helped me recognize patterns I hadn't seen before. Daniel used to tell me I was too sensitive whenever I got upset about things he did, and I believed him because he said it so calmly, like it was simply a fact. My therapist explained that it was manipulation, making me question my own feelings so I tolerate his behavior. She pointed out how Daniel would swear he'd change, and then repeat the exact same actions, always armed with a smooth excuse. I started keeping a list of red flags to watch for in future relationships. Things like someone who needs to be the hero in every story, or who blames everyone else when things go wrong, or who gets angry when you set boundaries. Writing it all down made me see how many warning signs I ignored with Daniel, because I wanted to believe he was who he claimed to be. 6 months after I moved out, I was grocery shopping when I ran into Emery in the produce aisle. He looked uneasy when he noticed me, but still walked over. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was good, which was true for once. Then he hesitated and said he thought I should know Daniel was dating someone new. My stomach sank, but I kept my expression steady. Emery said Daniel was already talking about wanting kids with her, telling her how important family was to him. I felt bad for this woman I'd never met because she had no idea what she was stepping into. Emery asked if he should warn her, and I told him no, that it wasn't our place, and she probably wouldn't believe us anyway. People need to discover who Daniel actually is on their own, the same way I eventually did. I wrapped up my errands and headed out, thankful I was no longer that version of myself. Hannah insisted on throwing me a divorce party even after I told her it sounded ridiculous. She invited everyone to her place and framed it as celebrating me finally choosing myself. Melissa came with Aaron, and they both hugged me as soon as they arrived. Melissa brought wine. Aaron showed up with expensive cheese, and we all sat around snacking and talking about everything except Daniel. At one point, Melissa lifted her glass and said she was proud to call me her sister, and Aaron nodded in agreement. It hit me that I had lost a husband but gained real family, people who cared about me for who I was, not what I could provide. Hannah joked about burning my wedding photos, and I laughed since I'd already tossed them weeks earlier. We stayed up late playing cards, and I felt lighter than I had in years, surrounded by people who saw me as a human being, not a problem to fix. Now I am building a life that truly belongs to me, not one built on Daniel's lies. My apartment is small, but it is decorated the way I love, not the way Daniel's mother said it should be. I go to therapy, work, and spend time with friends without stressing about what story Daniel might be telling about me. I am even open to dating again someday, but there is no rush. The difference now is that I know exactly what I will never accept from a partner. I trust myself to spot the red flags and walk away when something feels off, instead of making excuses and hoping things change. For the first time in years, I am genuinely happy, not acting happy to keep someone else comfortable. My life is calm, simple, and completely honest, and that matters more than any fake version of happiness I used to perform.